Suci Mariati Pakpahan from Group 3 will explain about equivalence in translation. For the first one, we explain about definition by expert. For the first, according to Vinay and Burnett, view equivalence-oriented translation as a procedure which replicates the same situation as in the original while using completely different wording. They also suggest that if this procedure is applied during the translation process, it can mention the stylistic impact of the short language text in the target language text. According to them, equivalence is the ideal method when the translator has to deal with proverbs, idioms, nominal, or adjectival phrases. With regard to equivalent expression between language pairs, they claim that they are acceptable as long as they are listed in a bilingual dictionary as full equivalence. And the next is, according to Burnett, equivalence was a translation process which corresponded to cultural adaptation. And the last is, according to Roman Jacobson, equivalence was a concept of capital importance when it came to establishing in a link between two texts. So, we can conclude that the definition of equivalence is the relationship between a short text and the target text that allows the target text to be considered as a translation of short text. Equivalence is a central issue in translation. Equivalence is a term or a word in the original language that has a word in the target language which means exactly the same. For example, in the short text, saya makan nasi, and the target text is I eat rice. Okay, we next to the concept of equivalence in different. According to Roman Jacobson's study of equivalence, gave a new impetus to the theoretical analysis of translation since he introduced the notion of equivalence in difference. On the basis of his semiotic approach to language and his aphorism, there is no signatum without synonym. He suggests three kinds of translation. For the first is intralingual, or with one language, example, rewording or paraphrase. The second is interlingual, or between two languages. And the third is intersemiotic, or between saying system. Now, I want to explain about what is formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence. There are two different types of equivalence, namely, the first is formal equivalence. Formal equivalence is focused attention on the message itself in both form and content, consists of a target language item which represents the close equivalent of the short language word or phrase. And the second is dynamic equivalence. What is dynamic equivalence? It, based even the principle of equivalence effect, is defined as a translation principle according to which a translation seeks to translate the meaning of the original in such a way that the target language wording will trigger the same impact on the audience as the original wording did open the short text audience. I think that's all about my explanation. The next explanation will continue by my friend. Thank you.
I will continue to the next discussion. The next discussion about types of equivalence. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Talenta. And then there are types equivalent of several theories. The first theory from Newmark, 1988, there are three types of equivalent. The first one, cultural equivalent. Cultural equivalent is inaccurate cultural words, substitution of search language with the target language. The search language cultural word is translated into target language cultural word. The translation is only the approximate. For example, the search language is Garda Malam and then the target language is the Night's Watch. The second type is functional equivalence. Functional equivalence uses more natural cultural words with a new specific term. This is the most accurate way to translate a cultural word. For example, the search language is dia tukang copet, and then the target language he is a pickpocket. The last type from Denmark is descriptive equivalent. Descriptive equivalent is the meaning of the cultural words explained in few words. For example, source language is kuda perang and then the target language is destroyer. The second theory, according to Larson, 1984, he has one type, namely lexical equivalence. Lexical equivalence is some words have the same or a similar meaning and refers translating lexical from one language into another. For example, search language, ia selalu mengunci bibirnya saat berkaca. And then the target language, she pursed her lips when she looked in the glass. The meaning of the word glass in the sentence is determined by the specific context in which it is used, being kacamata, glass, and kaca. The translation is more than just replacing words in one language. Say language 1 with words in another language, say language 2, or vice versa. It also includes some other linguistic consideration, notably scientific and semantic barrier. The third theory, according to Nida, 1964, Hatim and Munday, 2004, they have two types of equivalence. The first is formal equivalence. Formal equivalence focuses attention on the message itself in both form and content. In such a translation, one is concerned with such correspondence as poetry to poetry, sentence to sentence, and concept to concept. Pivot from this formal orientation, one is concerned that the message in the receptor language should match as closely as possible the different elements in the source language. Nida, page 159. For example, the source language is cepat sayang ambil fotoku, and then the target language is quick honey take my picture. The second example, the source language is aku sedang mengangkat piramida, and then the target language I got the pyramid in my hand. The second type of Nida theory is dynamic equivalence or pragmatic. Dynamic equivalence is the quality which characterizes a translation in which the message of the original text has been so transposed into the receptor language that the response of the receptor is essentially like that of the original receptors. For example, the source language is oh ya sudahlah, and then the target language is there goes. And the second example, the source language is membuat semua orang penasaran, and then the target language is leaving everyone to wonder.
Alright friends, I'm Renata will explain the types of equivalence. In an effort to answer the question of what is equivalent to what, Kuller distinguishes 5 different types of equivalence. For the first, denotative equivalence. Denotative equivalence involving the extralinguistic content of a text. Number 2, connotative equivalence. Connotative equivalence relating to lexical choices or established when the words in both languages and text trigger the same associations and connotations. Number 3, text normative equivalence. Text normative equivalence relating to text types. Number 4, pragmatic equivalence. Pragmatic equivalence refers to words in both languages having the same effect on the readers in both languages. And the last, formal equivalence. Formal equivalence relating to the form and aesthetics of the text. Formal equivalence refers to words in both languages having similar phonological or orthographic features. Having identified different types of equivalence, Kohler goes on or argue that the hierarchy of values can be present in translation only if the translator comes up with a hierarchy of equivalence requirements for the target text. Although the hierarchical ordering of equivalences is open to debate, Kohler's contributions to the field of translation studies acknowledges for bringing into translators' attention various types and ways in which the then fashionable desideratum of equivalence may be received. That's our explanation about this topic. Thank you for the time. See you.